Hello and welcome to Conversations from the ANF podcast. In this episode, I speak to Esher. She's a late discovery step-parent adoptee, foster carer and an adopter. Esher shares her experience of discovering that who she thought was a father was not as a teenager, and how that knowledge has unfolded through her life. She's also a foster carer and an adoptive parent, and her personal experience has given her an informed understanding of the impact on identity of adoption, and now influences how she supports her child. As always, if you have experience of adoption, fostering or special guardianship from any perspective, personal or professional, and would like to share that on the podcast, please get in touch through Facebook, Twitter, or you can email us at andfpodcast@gmail.com.
Hello, I'm Esher. I am lots of things. I'm a step-parent, late discovering adoptee, in that I found out my father wasn't my father when I was about 14 years old. I've also been a foster carer. That's on hold at the moment, as I am, actually now completed adopting my daughter, who was one of my foster daughters. And I really hope once she's settled in and once we've kind of navigated the first few years of being together. I'm a solo adopter, so that's an interesting dynamic to it as well. That I'd love to go back to fostering because it was a fantastic experience. So that's some of the things I get up to.
And you got in touch with me, and you gave me sort of a brief introduction to yourself, and I thought, wow, there's so many different ways this conversation could go, and each one of them is it's really significant. So, but can I start at the beginning then? You describe yourself as a late discovery adoptee. Can you sort of unpack that for us, and how did that play out?
I think I'm still unpacking it myself, right. In lots of ways. It's something that, as your brain develops and as your awareness and life experiences happen, you kind of go back to it and notice new nuances. But I was probably about 13 or 14. At that point, it was myself, my mum, my dad, and my two brothers, who are a few years younger than me. And I was sat down for a chat with my mum to explain that my dad wasn't my biological dad. So, 14, you've got all sorts going on already about your identity and who am I and what's it all about, and, life in general. So it was a little bit of a shock. And I went through layers of emotions about it. I think one of them, the biggest ones, was feeling like you'd been lied to for all those years. And it just felt like everyone around you had been lying to you, had asked if he was my father or not. No. So they hadn't, literally lied to me, but there were things that were being kept from me. And I think that really shook my world. That was the first immediate thing. I was really worried, will my brothers still love me, even though we're half brother and sister technically? Just feeling like lots of people had kept something from me was definitely quite damaging at that time of your life. I think there's never a good time to find out something like that, but finding out when you're kind of 14. And then I was introduced to my biological father a few years after that, at my request, because I was really struggling to understand, who I was. And that wasn't the greatest of experiences. It was quite a difficult experience. And he was very different to how I'd been brought up. I'd been brought up in a very loving family and supportive family, and he hadn't had that background himself. So he didn't really know how to be like that. So, you build things up in your head of how it's going to play out and how you might interact. And, you've got all these romanticized ideals that come from television and cartoons and things, and then it doesn't quite go like that. So it just felt like this layer upon layer of disappointment and confusion. And then it wasn't until a few years after that, coming into my kind of late teens and 20s, where the real identity issue started playing out, because my dad, who's technically my adopted dad, but I call him dad. And he is my dad in every sense. He's of Jamaican heritage. He was born in Jamaica and came here at a very young age. So I'd been socialized in this part British, part Jamaican, Caribbean, beautiful mix. And then I discovered that actually I have West African heritage rather than Jamaican. So it was a great experiment also, you know, that nature or nurture discussion about I'd been brought up as a part Jamaican. I've been to Jamaica. I understand patois and the culture and the food, but then actually, oh no, you're West African heritage. And some people who don't know might not understand how different those cultures are, you know? So, that took a lot of years. I think I was not aware. I know I wasn't consciously aware at the time, but exploring cultures and trying to find my place and try to understand more about myself. The added confusion was that we don't know exactly where my biological father's father is from in West Africa. So it wasn't like I could say it was one country. We just knew that he was West African, and I've had DNA tests done since then, and it points to West Africa, mostly around the Mali area, which is great because Mali has such beautiful heritage. I'm so, I'm loving learning about it. I have loved learning about it. So it's just lots and lots of layers of confusion and trauma, and just really trying to understand more about myself. I did have the anchor of my biological birth mum always being with me, but as I'm now a parent, I understand and appreciate more that we don't have the answers. We don't have all the answers as parents, even though children think we should have the answers, and they didn't always have the answers for me. And I think it's very indicative of the times, whereby it wasn't understood how harmful it could be withholding information like that about somebody's heritage and identity. And now there's lots of books about it. You've got Georgina Lawton and Rebecca Carroll, who both talk about transracial adoption, full adoption, whereby one of them, it was obvious that she wasn't her parents' biological child, and the other one, it wasn't obvious at all, and it was withheld from her, and she was told that they had Italian heritage, but she was actually mixed heritage. And luckily now there's much more awareness, although there's still a lot to do. So I do a lot of work of raising the awareness, especially in the adoption and fostering community. It was definitely indicative of the time where people didn't understand the impact that something like that could have.
I mean, it sounds like a defining moment in your life. I mean, of course, absolutely is, sort of pre that news dropping and after. And did it sort of unravel your relationship with your mum as well?
Yeah, I think it probably has given us additional challenges. I think mothers and daughters are always an interesting dynamic. As I'm learning now, as the mother of a 5-year-old, it's so interesting to see it from the other side of the childhood, I guess, from the other lens. I think it was just confusion for me, and it's never that I kind of have always understood that it was done from the best possible place with the knowledge they had at that time. My mum wrote me a lovely little book that told me the story of how she met my birth father and the circumstances around her making the decision to keep me and Maybe some people might say it was TMI, too much information, but actually it was quite useful to me. But I think, yes, over the years, and there was other things that happened around that time. My parents, not long after that, split and divorced. So that was added kind of stress and uncertainty, just things unraveled a bit in the teenage years, you know. I left home at 17 and had a wild few years trying to work things out and find my place in the world. So yeah, but mum and I, even there are times where we don't speak as much, but we always know where each other is, and we'll send each other a card. And you know, there's that what's the book, the invisible string. There's that invisible string that holds us together, no matter where we are and what stage of our relationship we're at.
Because I have a friend who's actually was a late discovery adoptee, discovered at 17 that he had been adopted, and he sort of described this sense of it, just sort of put this question mark against everything he was told by anyone.
Yes,
that had just not been there before, and sort of impacted on sort of every aspect of his life. But don't want to transfer that onto you, but
no, that resonates with me. It does, yeah. So yes, trust can be an ongoing issue in circumstances like that, and it's not knowingly. It's not like everyone you meet, you think, oh, they can't be trusted, or is what they're saying the truth? It's just something that's built inside you after an experience like that, which can take a lot of unpicking and challenging and awareness, self-awareness. I take part in a lot of kind of alternative therapies, and you know, really get to know myself because of some of those things that go on. That it does really impact you. That's right. So yeah, that resonates with me feeling, well, you know, it's the people who are the closest to you, who you trust the most, who understandably have made a decision, usually through the goodness of their own heart and thinking they're doing the right thing, but it doesn't take away the impact that it has. So yeah, it does. You carry it. It's something you carry for a long time. And I think I'm very much, when these things come to my awareness, I'm like, right, what can I do about this? And then try and find either a professional or techniques or whatever it is that can start unpicking it. I think it would be quite easy also to go down the other route and just bury your head in the sand and, you know, numb things and ignore things. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of from an external point of view, looking in, it makes perfect sense, but I can't begin to imagine what that feels like. So you then, I mean, I feel like we're covering a lot of ground. You became a foster carer. So what sort of led up to the decision to become a foster carer?
I think it was definitely impacted by the experience I'd had with my dad, who once I'd worked through, not even once, I think all the way through, I had this solid understanding that Dad loved me. He chose me, as it were, and I never felt any different to my brothers who were biologically his. And we have a very, very strong bond and a very deep love for each other. We've been through everything together, you know. And I always said that if I didn't, or even if I did have biological children of my own, that I would love to foster or adopt at some point, because I've experienced being loved by somebody who's not biologically my parent. And definitely it changed the trajectory of my life, that my dad was in my life. And yeah, it was something that I was really passionate about sharing with or other young people or children. And so then I went, you know, as you go through life and relationships and experiences, I didn't have biological children of my own for various reasons. And I became divorced from my ex-husband. And I just felt like this is the time. And I was at that crossroads of adoption and fostering. And looking back, I probably was a little lacking in confidence in myself of adopting on my own. And also I loved the idea of being able to help more than one child or young person as a foster carer. So I went down the foster care route. I went through the panel process, approval process with one agency, but there was something it just felt a bit corporate for me. So before I don't know if I actually saw any referrals with them. I don't remember now. But before I took a referral, I made the decision to move, which was a really hard decision to move for an agency when you've just been through, months and months and months of assessment and the soul digging and everything you have to do as part of a fostering assessment. But I knew what I was looking for in an agency or a local authority, and where I was at first wasn't right.
I can imagine that was a difficult conversation, because on a business level, they've invested time and energy and money in you, and you then sort of put your hand up and go, maybe not.
Yeah.
So what was their response to that?
Well, I had a few phone calls. Kind of people higher up in the agency started contacting me and, not necessarily trying to convince me. I think they were more interested in my feedback, which I respected. At least they were open to hear the feedback. And I had quite a little list by that point of things that had not sat right with me, or, and not petty things, quite big things. And I just felt like I didn't want to be under the stress, because fostering can be stressful, of fostering as well as with an agency who don't communicate very well, and were doing some of the things that were happening. So none of them could really argue with me in what I was bringing to them. And by that point, I had been put in touch with an agency who I got a really good vibe for. And so, yes, I made the jump to the second agency. And I think it was a little bit swifter, because we had the Form F from the first agency, and there was a person who crossed over the two. And so there was, we didn't speed through it, but we had a foundation to build on.
Yeah.
And so I went through panel for a second time. I think it was 4 or 5 months later. So that was probably, I think I passed panel in October, and referrals were coming in before I'd passed panel even. I was looking at referrals.
So what were you approved for? Because sometimes people don't realise that as a foster carer, you can be really specific in terms of what you feel you can, and what sort of fits within your family or your lifestyle or your circumstances. So what were you approved for? Well,
interestingly, when you go through the process, you have to really think about what you can do, what you can offer, what would suit your family and your lifestyle, etc. And I was quite adamant that I would prefer not to have a baby, any teenagers. I was really up for siblings, 2 siblings, because of the size of the room. I had bunk beds. So I guess in my head, I had, the idea of siblings who were quite close in age. And, I had thoughts about how far away we could travel, for contact and things like that. And I saw lots of referrals who fit a lot of those, not requirements, but, just
criteria
that I'd kind of arrived at with help from my social worker. And so I saw lots and lots of referrals, some of them just heartbreaking, and I had to really be strong with myself on a couple of them, because you want to take them all, but yes, I had to think about some of my own lived experiences and how they would fit with some of the experiences of the children. And then there was one that was very, was getting quite far along the process, but then we established that the birth parents or some of the birth family lived too close to me, so that wouldn't work. And then I think it was January, after being approved in the October, the first one came through, and it was everything that not everything, that's not right. It was quite a few of the criteria that I said wouldn't work for me. So it was a 2.5-year-old and a 14-year-old. So the completely each end of the age bracket. And they were from a little bit further away, still in county, but further away than I'd originally said we could do. But there was just something about their story, their experience, the fact that the older sister wanted to stay with the younger sister was very powerful for me. And so, yeah, that happened quite quickly once we started the process. And so they were my first placement.
I often, I'm a fostering social worker, so that's my bread and butter. I didn't come to it till quite late. But what I often reflect is that it's a bit like parachute jumping, in that we can watch films on it, we can read books on it, but there's nothing quite like stepping out of an aeroplane. I'm sure. Absolutely. I've never been parachute jumping, but I can imagine. And I think that oftentimes care is the first children coming, and I presume that you as you say, you're not a parent, so that's quite a step, as well. So what was that like? You've got a 14-year-old, which is all the teenagers, and you've got a little one, which is all the babies.
It was really something. Yes, as you say, nothing prepares you for it. I can still, just talking about it brings back the feeling from that day of just, first of all, you've got, I think there were about 5 social workers here, and the oldest arrived first. Just, you've got these scared, confused, and all the other stuff, little things. And even the older one just seemed so small and fragile. And, and when you've read notes on, behavior or challenges and stuff, but then when you first see them and you can just feel their vulnerability and, and so I just engaged with as much of my kind of, I come from a hospitality background, so connecting with people very quickly is in my skill set. So I was just thinking about how to get down to their level, keep a distance that's comfortable, think about my voice, and just let my home, the little one just was pinging around the house like a ping pong ball, just touching everything and looking at and flicking things. And, and now looking back, she was in complete shock. She was, completely traumatized by what was happening. And it was just her coping mechanism was to explore and see what everything does. So, yeah, it was just about, and it was funny. It was you can, it seems like a long time ago now, but you'll be able to fill in the gaps. You're supposed to have a meeting, aren't you, with all the social workers
like
and
a
the
placement
IRO
planning meeting
within a certain amount of hours, so they arrived at 4:00 on a Friday. So I didn't have any of that. It was like they were here for about half an hour and then they left us, and then I had the whole weekend until Monday.
Wow.
And it was in lockdown. So it was very limited. Actually, lockdown worked to my advantage in that scenario because it meant that we were quite contained and, we just stuck together. The 3 of us stuck together. We did all the things, going out shopping. They needed everything, clothes, food. The amount that was eaten in that first weekend was phenomenal. So yes, God, I'm getting back into it now, just talking about it. You don't always talk about it very often, but yes, it was definitely shocking for yourself, because they're here, they're in your space, and you're worrying about what to say, what to do. Are they okay? Would they tell you if they're not okay? I mean, a 2.5-year-old usually wear their heart on their sleeve, and you kind of know what's going on with them. There was a lot of dysregulation and a lot of upset, but it was amazing looking back on it now. But at the time, it was very daunting.
Yeah. Wow. So you, if I can sort of move the story along, you're now an adoptive parent.
Yes.
So how does a foster carer become an adoptive parent? Because it's not, I know it does happen a lot, but it's not necessarily, it's a little bit frowned upon, isn't it? Or it can be.
It can be, yes. As I say, it was never my intention. It just happened that way. You bond with the children and young people. I know some foster carers don't, but I think it's really essential to gaining trust and really, helping them understand what a relationship like that feels like, and to anchor them with you. So, but I think there is, because of the rules, and the guidelines of, where they can go in the house and how they can sit with you, and, those guidelines that do keep that kind of little barrier between you and them.
Yeah.
And so I had this young lady who care proceedings, how it goes. When you first get a placement, they'll be with you for 3 months, and then 6 months, and then 9 months. And I think it was a year later, care proceedings went ahead, and her care plan was, unfortunately, it wasn't reunification, and it was an adoption order. And I was very, 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 very fond of her. She blended very, very well within the family. It's only now we're where we are. And I'm sure there's more to come, but it's hard to explain. Like, you feel your heart unlocking as you know it's safer to love.
Yeah.
You always love the child from the beginning, and you care for them. But once you start realizing you're going to be together forever, it unlocks other parts of your feelings and emotions. And so, yeah, leading up to the decision being made at the hearing, I was trying to imagine saying goodbye to her and, her move into an adoptive family. And I really struggled with it. And I had to do a lot of thinking. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I spoke to my dad about it, but no, I didn't speak to any professionals about it. I really didn't want to impact the court proceedings in any way. I wanted my decision or interest to not impact things whatsoever.
Yeah.
Whether it would have or not, I don't know. But I felt strongly about that. So I kept quiet about it. But I'd been thinking about it for months before that. So I then spoke to my fostering social worker, and we had someone within the agency who had worked in the local authority in the special guardianship SGO department. I don't know if that's the right word, but she was a specialist in SGOs, because there was a lot of talk about was an SGO more appropriate than adoption. So I spoke to her, and she gave me some great information and a wealth of knowledge, and I was able to, with a lot of information, decide that I didn't think an SGO would suit me or my daughter, for various reasons that I won't go into. And so, yes, I made my thoughts known on a meeting, and some people used their poker face, and some people really started crying on the call. But even the poker face people later on down the line said, "We're so glad that you made that decision," And my family had no qualms about it at all. So it felt like the right thing to do. So I then started the process of being assessed as an adopter.
Wow, I mean, you articulated that so well, that the idea of unlocking your heart, but only when it's safe to. And as you say, you then find yourself in part of this legal pathway.
Yeah.
And it's never sealed until it's sealed. It's never,
exactly.
There's no order till there's an order. And but you articulated that so well, and I'm going to quote you.
Please do.
So in the midst of all that, I'm conscious that part of the story at the beginning was in terms of identity. And you talked about being passionate about supporting identity, about understanding identity and developing identity. So what were your thoughts in terms of this little person coming into your life about their identity, and what do you do? How do you sort of act and fulfill that?
Yes, it's been a real journey, which we're still on and will always be on. But I have really thought about the importance for her to understand her identity and her heritage and to stay connected. So, we have other experiences of adoption within our family, which I haven't gone into. Maybe that's another talk for another day. But again, it was about 20 years ago, and it was very much that dynamic, which still there are strains of now, whereby there's complete cutoff from birth family. And I understand sometimes that's essential to keep everybody safe. But I think there were times where that happened in the past where it wasn't necessarily essential, but it was just the way things were done, and that there'd be complete cut off and not much support for birth parents or necessarily adoptive parents to keep those threads of connection. So from the beginning, because there's a sibling group as well who around my daughter who are in different places, different care plans. So we've had photos around the house from the beginning of her siblings. When she had her wish you well with her birth mum, we were given some photos. So we've put those into a photo album, and it's, on her bookshelf with all her books and is very accessible to her. She knows the photos. She knows, even if she doesn't remember or hasn't met any of her immediate birth family, she has photos of them. She knows their names. I had to do, there's a lot of ego involved for me personally. I can't talk about other adopters, but I think I was coming up against barriers where there's part of it where you want to keep your child safe, and you just feel like, because some of the history, that I was finding I was using the excuse of keeping her safe as reasons to not have as much kind of contact or connection. But I had to really, really investigate that within myself. Again, as I said, about being passionate about identity. So I put a lot of effort into annual newsletters for birth mum and birth dad. We do at the moment annual meetup for siblings. And anyone who's involved in fostering and adoption understands that that's not just a case where we all bowl up to a park somewhere and have a lovely jolly time and off you go. There's a lot of emotional investment and preparation and framing, and we've done a lot of play therapy at home with little dolls from the doll's house to talk about where siblings are, because for them to understand, it's very complex. Sorry, I've digressed. Yes, so newsletters, and I put a lot in there. I think about what I would like to know, and I really go into as much detail without giving personal things or where we live and that sort of thing. And I actually asked if it was and I said to the social workers, please don't go to birth mum and say, Esher wants to do this. I don't want her to feel pressured. But if she was open to it, would she be open to meeting? And we did about 2 months ago, I think it was. I had a brilliant adoption social worker who organised it, and we met at a local authority office, and birth mum was picked up by her social worker, and it was great. It was beautiful. It was hard. I'm sure it was even harder for her, but I prepared some questions in advance, little things like where my daughter's name came from, what she's into, and any funny stories she's got, and any old photos she's got. So I sent those off over a week in advance so she could have a think about them. And then we met, and there were tears, there were laughter, we had a few photos taken together. So things like that. Internally, I've probably had a few challenges with them. And as I say, it's probably about part ego and part protection. But it's so important that you overcome those things and do what's best for your child. And I am not opposed to having another one again in 3, 4, 5 years' time, and then get one after that. And my biggest thing I wanted to reassure her birth mum in that meeting was, I'm not erasing you from her life. We have your photo. And when I started saying about the photo album, she welled up and she said, really? I said, absolutely. We talk about you, I'm not here to erase you. I will keep her safe, and I will give her everything she needs. And then when she's old enough, I'll take her lead on what she wants to do, So I think that was so important. At the end of the day, she's a human. She's been through a lot herself, and was never given the skills and the tools to provide my daughter with what she needed at that time. It doesn't mean she doesn't care and love her, So, yes, that's what I've been doing thus far. I've also kept in contact with the lady who used to run her old nursery. So maybe once a year, we'll meet up with her in a park, keeping in touch with some of the social workers. We have become friends with one of the social workers. And the other one, I'm sure once we're signed off officially, we're going to stay in touch as friends, because it's so important that those people are still connected to her. And she's one of those characters that everyone just wants to see, and see how she's doing, and, see how she's thriving. So, I think those are some of the things. Lots of photos, open conversations, staying connected with siblings and birth parents as much as is appropriate, and just trying to put myself in her shoes as much as possible.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's nothing haphazard about any of that. It's very thought through and very purposeful in sense of what you're doing. And what do you hope for the future, in terms of you as a family, and you're a family now? What does the future look like for the two of you?
That's a great question. And I think I put a few months ago, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself around that question. And actually, especially when you do things like this and you're talking about the journey over the past however many years, I thought to myself a few months ago, don't worry about what the future is, just let's enjoy this. We don't have social workers in and out of the house. We don't have health visitors. It's just a different dynamic now. We can lay on the sofa in our 90s, her laying on top of me, and, we can just be natural and just get to know each other, as I said, on that new level, So I think, honestly, longer term, she will be brilliant at welcoming other children into our family. Her nature she's a nurturer naturally. But I think that's far too soon to even be thinking about that. I think I'm under immense pressure for us to get a dog. You know, I think we're going to be quite a formidable little team. We're both very go-getting and very, you know, action kind of ladies. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but there's never going to be a dull moment for sure. I'm open to her taking me on whatever journey she's been sent here to take me on, and I got to try not to fight it and just go with the flow. I do feel like we were sent to each other. You know, I'm quite spiritual, and I do believe in, you know, when you think about the journey of us coming together, and whether that's, well, it's probably a combination of what I can bring to her and what she can bring to me, and what we can achieve between us. So that was a very long answer. I don't know is the answer, but I think it's going to be really cool and exciting, whatever we get up to.
Oh, and that was a great answer, and I think it's probably a really good place to kind of wrap it up. So,
yeah,
Esher, thank you so much. You've been so generous and so articulate, and it's been you've given me lots to think about, and yeah, some of that descriptions have really given me a lot of a lot of time to think about my own experience as well. So, thank you so much for your time, and
thanks for having me. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.